Can I prompt a question?
Of
So,
course.
like, if ChatGPT, like, they already have like subscription service as well. Like, would you pay for it?
Personally, no.
Even if like the free model's removed, and there's no other AI service, would you still pay for it?
Okay. Hi, my name is Helen, and I'm a senior studying neuroscience and law, and I'm one of the opinion editors at the Daily Trojan. I'll be your roundtable moderator today. So Roundtable is an open dialogue series for students to share their thoughts and perspectives on issues concerning the USC community, as well as just the greater society. For our first roundtable, we have invited 3 students to join in a conversation with the primary goal of providing the USC community with various perspectives on open AI or ChatGPT, its application, and its place within education. Before we get started, could each of you please give me your name, first and last, pronouns, major, and year, starting with you.
I'm Leo Zhuang. I'm a senior. My major is computer engineering, computer science.
I'm Max Wong. I'm a senior, and my major is business administration.
I'm Cassius Palacio. I'm a sophomore, and my major is architecture.
Great. So for our first question, kind of as an icebreaker, do you think you could recognize ChatGPT generated text?
To be honest, for the most part, no. But if it was something more specific or domain, focus on in a certain domain, maybe.
In the majority of cases, no, unless I were really looking out for it. But on a day-to-day basis, if I wasn't, prepped, probably not.
I'm kind of dense when it comes to like recognizing, the difference between like real like text and then ChatGPT. Like it all feels like it comes together.
Yeah.
If you train it well, then it's like, well, I have my answer, and it sounds too good to be true.
Kind of as a follow-up, do you think any of your classmates have used it? And like, have you been able to recognize if like your classmates have used it on like discussion posts and stuff?
Yes.
Yeah.
In fact,
Yeah.
as a matter of fact,
Definitely?
I do know.
You do
Yeah.
know for a fact. Awesome.
Absolutely, because they've come to me to check.
Oh,
Hey, does this
okay.
sound human?
Fantastic. Please raise your hand if you think that artificial intelligence will eventually surpass human intelligence. Leo, you are the only one of the 3 to not raise your hand. Would you like to elaborate on that?
Yeah, so I kind of viewed intelligence as basically AI's ability to just do things that humans can do. And AI is generally going to be trained on something that humans generate in the first place. So in a lot of contexts, it can really only do as much as it is provided.
I believe that in many instances, it already has surpassed human intelligence. If you look at things like precision and accuracy, there's no competition whatsoever. AI beats humans in every situation. I think that we're actually on the defensive, and we look for things in which humans could be better at versus AI, more complex creative tasks. And even then, there's a real competition, which in my opinion says everything.
Yeah, like artificial intelligence to me, I use things like Midjourney and ChatGPT simultaneously, but it kind of accelerates like how I think about and how I view architecture and design, and it kind of like pushes me like past my barrier or my limit to think about like, well, what I've been exposed to and like what the training model or like the artificial intelligence itself has been exposed to, and it's kind of insane to like let it come up with the ideas that I thought I had. But instead it just goes even further than that before, and it just kind of makes me feel a bit incompetent, but I still use it, If anything, it's just more like an innovative way of thinking because I'm still building on the past.
So the original question was if it will eventually surpass human intelligence. So even though perhaps right now it might not, do you think that it has the potential to?
Yes, but not on like a Age of Ultron level, I think it's just more of like if I can have this robot or this AI do it for me, then why would I need you? In a sense of like efficiency and just like even like to have a cheaper like budget and whatnot. If I can have this do it for me, there's no need for XYZ,
Do you think universities should implement the use of AI detectors to evaluate academic writing?
I think that that's a very important part of kind of academics, is that students produce their kind of own material for evaluation, because I think ChatGPT's use, or like, large language models, their use in kind of writing essays and stuff in academia can kind of be related to plagiarism. So the purpose of academia is kind of to, at least with assessments, to evaluate the student's ability to do some said task. If you just use a large language model or something like ChatGPT to do it, I don't see that any differently than plagiarism. It's kind of, if you use ChatGPT, that kind of only assesses your ability to prompt the AI to produce what you want, and not exactly your ability to produce the said material.
I couldn't agree more. So, if the goal is to evaluate the students, their output and their understanding of the material, then anything to be able to do that, including, putting in these checkers. I think another solution I've heard tossed around would be just going back to old school timed writing, right? And really, I think that whatever needs to be done so that students are actually learning and are getting their money's worth.
Raise your hand if you think the development of AI will reduce job opportunities.
I do think that the overtake of AI is somewhat exaggerated. I think a lot of jobs will still be here. However, a lot of the more monotonous jobs will, even for more white-collar jobs. So of course, I think things like potentially cashiers or secretaries, those kind of jobs which are very mundane, will disappear. But on top of that, even in the world, for example, of engineering, I think that a lot of the people who do more repetitive tasks, like the people who just write testing code or things like that, all they do really is programming, I think those jobs will also start to disappear. Because if you kind of take a field like engineering, for example, as more specifically software engineering, programming is kind of the monotonous part of that task, right? You have to do the engineering, but then to actually build your product, you have to program. And what AI can really do, especially like these code generators, is kind of take away that back end of the process.
I absolutely think that AI is going to remove some jobs. I think it'll absolutely create jobs, but I think that those will be concentrated in relatively few industries compared to the jobs that it will take. In my work, which is in visual effects, I work at an AI company that works with VFX. I'm watching the focus shift from the roles of VFX artists to how they can support the AI. So I think that even that there is opportunity for people in non-technical roles who can work with this technology to not just keep their jobs, but to benefit and to become more skilled. But by that same token, as the focus shifts, the people who don't adapt, I think, are going to get left behind unless there is, some regulation or, greater access to being able to work with this kind of stuff. And I think that for on the technical side, low-level tasks and low-level programmers aren't entirely in the clear. I think that they also face some of these threats.
Cash?
I kind of agree with this point, but I think AI will enhance, your skill set if you can use it correctly. Those who don't, utilize AI itself will just miss out and then therefore lose their job, But I don't think, or I don't have full faith that every company out there is going to rely on AI to do their low-level tasks, because I think for the more technical roles, like the other participants were mentioning, I think there would be a small erasure, but there still needs to be somebody there to manage it. There needs to be someone there, like you said, to verify that intelligence, make sure it's right, safeguard it, because now there's like this new rise of diversity, equity, and inclusion within companies. And if you just really have AI running the show, even like when it comes to like mathematical tasks and whatnot, you just can't leave it there to fend for itself because sometimes it's wrong.
I think one major factor about how many jobs are replaced with AI also depends upon how accessible AI can become, right? Because if these large companies, for example, that create these things like ChatGPT, if they put basically like a paywall, put it behind a paywall, then you're going to probably see it adopted a lot less generally throughout the whole world. But if they make it a lot more open access, which is similar to what they have now, you'll probably see it replace a lot more.
I agree with what you're saying, and really, I think that, my opinion is that ChatGPT is ultimately a good thing in terms of increasing accessibility and just increasing comfort. I think so many people are intimidated by artificial intelligence, and that there are so many misconceptions, and that for a huge portion of the population, it's behind this screen of discomfort. And so really any opportunity for the average person to just be able to play around with it, to understand this is how it works, is moving us in the right direction. And yeah, I think something that's not talked about enough is you can understand what AI is, you can work with it, but that's entirely different from being on the right side of the line when it comes to your job being cut, or really suffering from the negative consequences of it. So I think that is that conversation, and what happens with that will ultimately decide whether or not this is going to increase the amount of jobs, or it's going to cut a lot of people's careers.
Do you think that AI will fundamentally change the way we interact with the world around us? If so, how?
So I think AI will definitely change the way we can interact, but I don't think it'll fundamentally change it to where we don't recognize it anymore.
In terms of as a regular human in a law-abiding society, I think it would change the world a little bit, in a sense to where it's where you are a bit savvier, but you don't really have the mental capacities that you did have before. If some bot is going to do it for me, then if I plug in the right prompts, if I know what to say, then I'm not really critically thinking. I'm just thinking about what its response could be, or how its response could enhance my answers. I also think that sometimes when you start to plug in and feed it more information, the better it is at I guess quote unquote becoming human. And whatever that looks like is, I fear it's not the best decision to be made.
Does AI change the way we interact with the world? I guess that would depend on whether you'd include AI as part of the world or something that can take you away from it. I think that there's a good chance that if you don't include AI, that it'll reduce the amount of time that we are spending with the world, or it could. But by that same token, it might just fundamentally make us, a little savvier. It might give us more skills. I think that I will say this, I think that the amount of time we're going to be spending talking to bots will increase, and I think that it will over time become more fulfilling and more organic.
So there are some concerns that based on the data and algorithm provided, AI systems will perpetuate existing biases and discrimination. Do you agree, and do you think this can be mitigated?
It's very comparable to research studies in medicine. I know there are a lot of research studies that primarily focus on Caucasian males, and those results kind of don't generalize well to other demographics. So I think AI, you can kind of think of it in the same way, where if you feed it data that is biased, you're going to get biased results. And I think at the end of the day, to kind of alleviate that, you have to focus on the people aspect of it, right? Who's training this? Who's training these models? Who's providing the said data? Right? Who's collecting said data? And I think it's all about regulation, about the group of people who work on that side of AI, to make sure that AI doesn't produce anything biased.
As mentioned, AI is not evil. It's being trained. It's learning off of the data that we provide it. And I'm hopeful that the data is going to get better. And less biased.
Whoever is managing the data sets, they need to be open source. I feel like they need to be open enough to where everyone can view it, but the privacy part, that type of screening is, there to omit certain like identifiers about who or X, Y, Z. And this can be mitigated. It just has to be done at a federal level than just having like these big companies, like I would say like the FANG companies like doing this, because oftentimes I know it's not always smart to go the federal way to deal about certain things, but when it comes to resources or toolkits like AI, I feel like you need to be impartial and to a certain point just need to like set your foot down. But then there's like also this whole another opening about like, is even the federal government impartial? Because now we have two like split parties and whatnot. It's a whole big fiasco, and it needs to be mitigated by world leaders or just leaders who are prominent in AI that show a heavy focus in diversity, equity, and inclusion.
I don't understand how the feds could necessarily crack down on this. I mean, are they going to put handcuffs around an algorithm, right? So, and also I think there absolutely is incentive from corporations to improve this on their own because one, huge PR issues, two, because users won't use products that don't work, and that's ultimately one of the outcomes, not just people being pissed off and rightfully so, but, if I can't if I can't sign into my phone because it doesn't recognize my features because of the pigment of my skin, then I'm going to buy another phone. So I think that there absolutely is incentive. But three, also, I'm for regulation where it can be applied. But I think, I don't know, maybe I'm too hopeful, but I feel like this issue is one that is going to fix itself because I just think that the PR scandals that come out of this are embarrassing enough for these corporations where, they've put themselves into a position to like, okay, we need to improve. I think it's up to us as citizens and users of their products to continue to press them to do better.
I just meant more of like laws in place to be like, is this data what it says it is? Do you have the previous data, to just back it up, like back up your facts, don't let it be to the point of like confirmation bias, where things run amok.
Yeah. I think this is one of my favorite parts of the discussion because I think that ultimately this is something that is good for the whole world to talk about. I think that these issues would exist regardless of artificial intelligence. People would still have biases. People would still treat people differently, right, based on their color, creed, etc. And having something that is inherently, not human, right, that you can't put handcuffs around to force this into the light and to say, hey, you need to look at what you're putting in because this is what's coming out, is a really healthy thing for us.
Well, it seemed like an easy problem, but if you think about how would you raise a child so that they wouldn't have any biases, right? To some extent, it sounds easy, right? Of course, teach them the right way to do things, et cetera, et cetera. But there's so many different variables that makes it very difficult, right? That's why they say, like, it takes a community to raise a child, right? Well, unfortunately, AI is quite frankly similar to a small child. You have to tell it exactly what to do. And so I think that kind of sums up how difficult it is to kind of manage and train AI.
Raise your hand if you think artificial intelligence is a tool that is equally accessible to all.
I think that we're doing better, but we're not there. We're not there yet. I still think that there's a minority of people who are going to get much more out of AI than everyone else, and that I think people need to reframe this and look at, everyone could get something out of AI, but everyone could get a lot more.
Yeah, it is not. We have kind of this little thing called the Great Digital Divide, and with that comes like these issues of equity. I think not everyone is going to have access simply because we cannot even solve this issue of the Great Digital Divide. And once we not even understand, like it's right there, it's in our faces, but it's more just like, how do we make sure everyone is up to date and like up to scale about how we want to go around these things, you know? Because to not to be on the, I guess, receiving end of the digital divide is to simply be lost in the dark. Everyone, I would say that at least what I've observed is that everyone needs a phone to navigate this country, or to like even navigate, you know, your simple surroundings, your environment, to learn to be educated. And if you are missing out on that, then how can you even, you know, accelerate to other places where you need that, like, you know, more components of like how tech can influence your life, you know?
Even if everyone had like the ability to connect wirelessly or technologically to some kind of AI platform, I think in terms of the knowledge gap to use said AI is also that gap is also pretty large. Something like ChatGPT kind of brings that barrier of entry down, but I think it's still very apparent, right? I think knowledge of AI greatly impacts how well you can use it, and I think that education is not very spread, you know. And the second thing I think I mentioned earlier was basically ChatGPT is free, but you know, the shareholders are going to eventually want more money. So I think it is highly likely that the most accessible things like ChatGPT are going to become, you know, subscription services and things like that. And once you start introducing money in the equation, which I think is inevitable because it is corporations that make these services, it's going to become a lot less equitable.
Can I prompt a question? So, like, if ChatGPT, like, they already have like subscription service as well. Like, would you pay for it?
Personally, no.
Even if like the free model's removed, you know, and there's no other AI service, would you still pay for it? And this is open to everyone.
I'd ask you how much. But it depends. It absolutely depends. Let me see GPT-4, and I'll get back to you.
Yeah.
You know, thinking about the digital divide really had me thinking, you know, generative AI is pretty different from traditional AI. Those are like the more bespoke or in-house algorithms, and at least, you know, at present, those are still the money makers. So those are still concentrated heavily with a small group, relatively speaking, versus you know, generative tools like ChatGPT. But even then, you know, as we discussed, right, how useful that might be. Sure, you can draft up, let's say you don't know how to code, and you have GPT come up with a 10-step program for learning Python, right? And then you can integrate it, and then now you have your scripts coming out. If you're struggling to put food on the table in the first place, you're probably not going to get through all of that versus someone who, you know, is doing this for fun while they're at USC, right? So I don't think that it is at all equal. And regarding subscriptions and stuff, I am absolutely concerned. I don't think that there's any guarantee that it is going to stay as equal as it has been. Plus the fact that, you know, OpenAI is no longer just a nonprofit. They changed that status a couple months ago. It's quasi nonprofit now, and you know, we'll have to see.
I think there is an example of issues with equity right at our doorstep. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with what GitHub is, but it's basically like this online code storage place that you can use. And they released this software, they call it GitHub Copilot. And basically what it allows you to do is basically write what you want it to write, and it'll print out a bunch of code. And quite frankly, I've used it a couple times. It's pretty good.
It's great.
Yeah, it's pretty good. But the thing is, I think it costs maybe $60 a month-ish. Yeah, I think it's about, I'm not sure the exact price. But imagine you're a student here at USC, right? And you're doing a programming assignment, right? Said student could use GitHub Copilot if they could afford this subscription, and just quite frankly get past all their classes super easily.
I think like there's like this issue like equity because they know they can get away with it. You know, no one's gonna be like, you know, as we're in this like this capitalist society, like, no one's gonna be like, hey, don't do that. You know, I think they're here to make money. You know, but I think that like for students who are well off, you know, I feel like there needs to be a certain point where they're like, AI did help me with my research, or like they need to give credit to AI itself. You know, to be like, this research is backed or, you know, assisted with AI, because now it becomes, I guess, now to the source of like human credibility. And I think we can even kind of see that a little bit with like NFTs and ownership, you know, and that in itself.
Do you think that ChatGPT generated responses have merit as genuine or quality academic writing, equal to those written by human academics?
I think not, mainly because you don't have to give ChatGPT prompts for ideas. In the respect, actually let me backtrack on that statement. I think it really depends on how you do it. You could feed ChatGPT a whole 5-paragraph outline and get it to you to produce a paper. And I think that would be somewhat valid. Whereas you could also just give ChatGPT, write me a paper about this, right? So I do think there is a spectrum, but unfortunately there is no way to kind of vet how much of your ideas are actually your own. Because for the most part, I think the main value in, I mean, of course there's value in like writing, but I think a lot of the value in essays and things like that come from the ideas, and there's just no way to vet whether or not that comes from you or just from AI generation.
As genuine, absolutely not. But as quality, yeah, with refinement. You know, give me 10 minutes, and I'll just I'll get it better and better and better. And I can almost guarantee that if I didn't tell you, you could probably, you know, 5 out of 10 times, it looked pretty similar. But you know, whether it's genuine, I don't think it ever will be, because, you know, if it's just treat it as another person. Don't treat it as an AI. Then it's just plagiarism. It's ghostwriting at best case. And yeah, if it doesn't come from you, right, then it's not your writing.
Yeah, and just agreeing with that, you know, it is ghostwriting at best. You know, I don't think any student here active on USC's beautiful campus is going to be like, I use ChatGPT to write my paper, at least not publicly, you know. But in instances where that has happened, they've always said like, oh no, I'm rereading this, you know, like I'm not using, this isn't like the final cut, you know, like just making edits here and there. If this doesn't make sense, I'm gonna follow up with my own reasoning and words, you know, it's more like a plug and play. So I would say like it doesn't have its own standing for like academic merit, but it does hold some sort of merit when it comes to journal structure and composure.
There's always these questions about whether or not something is good or bad. You know what I mean? For example, like, you know, when comics came out, you know, they said, oh, rot your brains. If you go further back, you know, Ancient philosophers said, books will rot your brains, you know? And then to some extent, you know, while even I may feel that, you know, ChatGPT writing is not genuine, you know, I could see how someone, you know, many years down the line, you know, could somewhat see that it could be somewhat genuine, because it does to some extent rely on your input to produce content. So
yeah, I think that whether or not it's genuine really doesn't matter so much with regards to its quality, right? So if it's quality, it's quality, and if it's useful, which is, I guess, the logical step from there, it's useful. And so maybe in academia it will be 10, 20, 50 years from now, that rigidity will stay, but outside, quality is quality, and where it can help people, where it can you know, have uses, I think it will stick.
Do you think AI will disrupt social structures and institutions or improve them?
Off the top of my head, I think it has the potential to, simply because it does disseminate kind of knowledge to the masses, right? I mean, of course, there will be certain demographics that, you know, will struggle to get access to it due to equity issues. For the most part, a lot of knowledge that is kind of right now stuck for the academics and the industry leaders can really be disseminated for the common people, right? For example, I can build pretty powerful AI tools just on my own computer now because a lot of these companies are making it open source and allow me to build these things. And I think when we start talking about social structures and things like that, I'm not exactly sure the way it would happen, but I can envision once more people get more information and more tools at their disposal, I can see that happening.
Yes, in such a short period of time, we've watched all these different industries, academia. I would even argue for a select group of people, for more fringe areas, the amount of time spent working with AI has increased exponentially. Copilot, for example. How much time is a manager, engineer spending with Copilot or with other tools versus some minions that they had before, right? So, whether or not this is going to improve them, I don't know, and I'll be watching very closely.
I would say it depends on how integrated it is into someone's life or even those systems itself. To be quite honest, I really do see AI as a tool, but when I look at this tool in this country, we're already divided, our social construct is already messed up. And I don't even know if AI being introduced to that table is even the right way to go, because everyone's going to be stuck in their own bubble. Even students here are stuck in their own bubble. UC is a bubble itself. And if you, and I'm going on a very larger scale here, but to bring it back down, if I'm a user using AI to promote my content, to generate things that I've never thought of before, or I didn't really have the necessary knowledge, they're just only going to reinforce what I say with the influence of the internet and what's online, with the tools they have at hand that are best going to support me in my answer. And I do kind of fear for it because then it's if I do get the right information, whether it's wrong or not, someone's gonna have full faith in this toolkit, and someone's gonna be the computer said it's right, so it has to be right,
I think a very scary application that I thought of is deepfakes these days. They're getting very real, right? At least from my exposure, most of the exposure is just me seeing, Obama and Trump playing Minecraft on TikTok,
They're best friends.
Yeah, they're best friends, But the thing is, that kind of content, the voices are shockingly fluid and real. I could see in maybe even 5 years that people who have malicious intent could create kind of fake content of maybe the president or some political leader overseas saying things that they don't say. And then it goes back to that idea of what do you trust, right? If it's that real, who do you trust? And so I think in terms of political institutions or even some social institutions, the use of things like deepfakes could be very scary.
Yes, I completely agree. I'd say that trust in information and how it's received, and also how it's talked about and interacted with, is an institution that has absolutely been damaged and could go so much worse. And I'd respond to that by saying, specifically with deepfakes, because I work with deepfakes on a very high-end level, those tools are even scarier and what they could be used for. And a lot of what you see, 96% of deepfakes are used for, without people's consent. 5 years from now, that technology is going to be a lot more fluid, and not just that. This is done usually by individuals. So if you could put together a couple people, right, and put together a team and funding, what this could be used for is, you exponentially expand the amount of damage that you could cause. So that has to be tracked, and not just that, but I think that we have suffered credibility with anything in regards to AI because of this whole issue of trust.
Like, AI could get so ugly so bad because of things like this, and it is kind of up to us, to try to like put it in check. But the way how AI moves, it's so fast already that like I fear we're just simply behind in the race.
Company that seeks to work in that space, or any type of person who's selling or using these algorithms, something has to be done. I don't know what the solution is, but I would say this is still like child's play. This is still very young technology, and if we can all see the damage that's being done. I think action has to be taken sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
So, thus far, there were 10 questions asked. How many do you think were written by ChatGPT? Please show with your hands. Show of fingers. The answer is 2. Can you identify the 2?
I'm gonna say question 2 and 6.
Okay.
1 and 4.
Okay.
I think definitely 6.
Got it. The answer is 2 and 6.
No way.
Yeah. You're cracked cash. Alright. Were you surprised by anyone's responses today, and has your perspective on AI changed at all?
I feel like I had pretty similar views to the other two with respect to kind of, we realize AI is kind of in its infancy. There's already kind of, issues cropping up with it that we can see with regards to equity, as well as kind of seeing that AI is kind of dependent upon the people who develop them. I'm kind of like, you get in what you get out what you put in,
Yeah, I don't know if I was necessarily surprised, but it was really great to hear other people's thoughts, especially from other backgrounds. Do I have my thoughts on AI changed? I don't know. We'll see.
It was really like reaffirming to just bounce, my ideas, my conceptions, and just really share that. I think necessarily not a lot of students like have that platform. And I'm certainly not going to go on Reddit to find answers, I think like this conversation itself is really beautiful, and it kind of shows, like who we are and what we're capable of on that platform. But also I do think, I think because we're students, at this institution, that we are able to have answers like this, so in a way it is sort of like a warped kind of, I was like a warped, view about how we view AI, because we aren't necessarily like educated and we have the tools and resources to find out more. It's a really big institution. You're gonna have a lot of resources in general. But my thoughts on AI necessarily haven't really changed. If anything, like I am still going to use the services, because they do offer me a lot of benefit and they save me a lot of time. Time that I don't have. I'm an architecture student, I run a nonprofit, I do all these other things, AI simply just really speeds that up for me, which is like, one of the main selling points about AI. Like at the end of the day, I'm still a consumer, but I can also be an ethical consumer, and I think that's what the biggest takeaway I could get from this is, being an ethical consumer and making sure that what I'm doing with AI is good, obviously.